Okay, we are learning a talk from the Rebbe tonight, tomorrow night, which is Shabbos, Friday night Shabbos, is the birthday and yahrzeit of the second Rebbe Chabad, the Mitteler Rebbe. Very special day, very huge person, the Mitteler Rebbe. If we could even comment on that, how great the greatness of the Mitteler Rebbe. So the Rebbe would the Rebbe talk huge things about the Mitteler Rebbe. So last year we learned hold on. Last year we learned the Farbrengen of the 1950 Tafshin Aleph, and this year we're learning from Shabbos also, like this year, Tes Kislev on the year Tafshin Chav Tes, which is 69, going into 69, 68 going to 69. Okay, the Rebbe says like this. The first Sicha is kind of, we're just going to get a little bit of the Sicha because the most of it was edited, and therefore it's the parts that are edited are put together in the Likutei Sichos, so they take it out of the unedited version. Tes Kislev Yom Hailula Sha'ad Miram Tzai. Tes Kislev is the day of the passing of the Mitteler Rebbe. Benoi, he's the son, Umimalim Mekoymen, the one who filled, meaning he took over the leadership, Shal Admir Hazokim, of the Alter Rebbe, means the founder of Chabad, the author of the Tanya. Miyase Teres Chassidus Chabad, the Alter Rebbe, who is the founder of Chassidus Chabad, Kemevor Bedivru Rabbeseinu Nisienu, as is told in the works of the Rebbes about the succession of the Mitteler Rebbe. Ubefrat, we find most details about the life and the succession of the Mitteler Rebbe besichos in the talks of Shal Kvoi Kedushas Maricham Yadmir of my father-in-law, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, the sixth Rebbe. V'gam Erev, and also Shabbos being the 9th of Kislev, also is Erev, the day before Yud Kislev, the 10th of Kislev. What's the 10th of Kislev? Also connected to the Mitteler Rebbe. It's the Chag geulah, the day of redemption of the Mitteler Rebbe. We're going to learn a little bit about this in the Sicha, the talk today, the connection between the birth, passing, and the geulah and the redemption of the Mitteler Rebbe. It means he was in prison, not exactly as severe as his father as far as the conditions, but it was severe accusations against the Mitteler Rebbe. He was imprisoned by the Russians, and he was released on the 10th of Kislev, the day after his birthday, and then almost a year to the date before his passing. He didn't even survive 1 year after that. He passed away within mamish 1 day shy of the day of his redemption. The Rebbe says what's so special about this year, and again, like this year, 5,786, 2025, is Shetes Kislev Chol B'Shabbos. That this year, the 9th of Kislev falls on Shabbos, the Yud Kislev B'Yom Rishon, and the 10th of Kislev is on Sunday. But I see in the exact way, as it was that year, in the liberation of the Mitteler Rebbe, that his birthday, it wasn't his yahrzeit yet, obviously, he didn't pass away. His birthday was on 9th of Kislev, and the next day was his redemption. B'Shnas Hagul, in the year of his redemption. Yedua is known. So the Mitteler Rebbe was mamish, Shebeminchas Shabbos Tes Kislev, that it was on Mincha. He was more in house arrest in Vitebsk, I believe. So he wasn't like the Alter Rebbe was literally in the prison not Leningrad, whatever it was. That wasn't called Leningrad. That was called something else. Kidur Shebeminchas Shabbos Tes Kislev, on that year during the Mincha time on the 9th of Kislev, B'Shnas Hagula, meaning the year of the redemption. Omer Admir Amtzai Maimer. He was in the middle of saying a Chassidic discourse on the verse of the tefillah of the prayer of Mincha on Shabbos, which is Ata Echad V'Shimcha Echad. You're one and your name is one. V'az Higia B'Suras Hagula. On Shabbos, they told him he's freed, but it's Shabbos. He couldn't do what he had to do to be freed, and therefore B'Yom Rishon this happened to almost all the Rebbeim. That there was kind of a delay in the actual redemption that happened to the Frierdiker Rebbe on the 12th of Tammuz. So B'Yom Rishon, Yud Kislev Haisa geulah b'Poyel. And when was his actual redemption? Was on the 10th of Kislev, which is when he was actually released. So he was notified that he would be released during Mincha, which is the highest part of the day of Shabbos, when he was saying a discourse on the prayer of Mincha, At Echad, you're one, V'Shimcha Echad, and your name is one. Ubagdama, the Rebbe says like this. The Rebbe says sometimes we have things that are connected in Torah to the days of the month, and sometimes they're connected to the days of the week. There's things that are connected to the sun and things that are connected to the moon. The two great luminaries. Chodesh Kasher Meirech. We know the month is our month. The Jewish month goes according to the moon, lunar month. Shinyanis Virsa Malchus. We know that in Hasidic ideas, the moon is like the attribute of kingship, meaning that the moon has no light of its own. It only reflects the light of the sun. So to Malchus kingship, the character of kingship is the ability to take the qualities of the person and in the kingship manifest it in a way of royalty. But Malchus itself has nothing. And also we know that Malchus, a king, in theory, everything is given to him by his subjects, right? The taxes pays for the life of the king. This idea of the month being like a woman, which is the idea of female receptacle. The weekdays are connected to the sun. Why are the weekdays connected to the sun specifically? So he says, because the weekdays go according to the morning, the sun rises, the sun sets, is the days, the 7 days of the week, which represents the idea of Zah, which is the 7 midos, the Zer Ampin, the small complexion, which are the midos. So the midos, the emotions, feed to Malchus. So too, the sun represents the mashpia, the giver, which represents the days of the week, and the days of the month are represented by the concept of Malchus, which is like the moon that takes from the light of the sun. But that's the way it is according to Torah. So that's a truthful thing. From here is understood. If we have a holiday that falls out not just on the monthly day, which we only celebrate, means we don't celebrate a weekly situation. We celebrate that in something that happened in a certain year on this day of the month, we celebrate it. So therefore, but when we do get the opportunity, that what happened also on the way it fell out on that day of the week. So we're more connected and more reliving as it was in its original time. That not only are we celebrating the way on what happened on the day of the month, but we're also celebrating how it happened on the day of the week. That in the days leading to the release of the Mitteler Rebbe, that his birthday was on the 9th of Kislev, that went into the 10th of Kislev on Sunday, just like the year the Rebbe's bringing in 1968, and as it is this Shabbos in here this year. Like we know that in Yiddishkeit, this idea that when we remember things, it rehappens. And that's why we celebrate a geulah, a day of redemption, a day of a yortzeit and a birthday, because the idea of niskarim v'nasim, when you celebrate, when you're niskarim, you remember an incident or a mitzvah or a miracle that happened on a certain day, then that it rehappens that day, and all the flow, the energy that caused for this day to be an auspicious day for the breakthrough of what happened on that day, that energy happens again, and now we're having it not just in the energy of the day of the month, but also together as it goes together with the day of the week. So again, this year, as we're sitting here tonight, it's going to be the same thing. So, and the Rebbe spoke very much about the idea of specifically when it comes to the Mitteler Rebbe, to tap in the energy of the Mitteler Rebbe. So this year, it's with great more emphasis and great more power. Much more powerful, much more emphasized than it would be on a regular if the 9th and 10th of Kislev would fall out on another day of the week. Okay, now here the Rebbe is going to, in the non-edited version, we're just going to get the footnotes of the Rebbe's continuation of his talk, because the Mitteler Rebbe passed away also on the 9th of Kislev, and he passed away in a very miraculous way. Meaning to say, he got sick very fast after his liberation. Again, this is after the Napoleon Wars. There was the Jews were on the move. There was a lot of difficulties. It was the whole Russian area, the area of the war, really affected the Jewish life in those times, as people know the history, and it really affected literally the health of the Mitteler Rebbe. Not because he himself, but the suffering he saw his brother and sisters going through, the persecution, the poverty that was happening in those times under the Tsar it got him so deep that literally it took his life. But when he was mamish, got very sick, and as he was about to pass away, he got this surge of energy, and the Chassidim got excited. They thought that, wow, the Mitteler Rebbe is getting, that's it, it's a miracle. The Mitteler Rebbe is getting better again, and he started to say a Maimer Chassidus, a Chassidic discourse, and as he reached a certain word, he turned to the wall and he passed away. He passed away as he was saying Chassidus, because that was the whole life of the Mitteler Rebbe. Similar to how Rashbi, how the author of the Zohar, passed away. So in the talk, the Rebbe compares the life and the mission of the Mitteler Rebbe to that of the Rashbi. So we're just going to get the bulletin notes over here. The Rebbe says, the continuation of the talk from the Rebbe, which we have this statement of the Tzemach Tzedek. Now his successor was his nephew / son-in-law, meaning his sister's elder son. She passed away young, when he was an infant, when he was a child, and raised by his grandfather, the Alter Rebbe, which was the father, and the Rebbe before the Mitteler Rebbe. After he married his first cousin, the Tzemach Tzedek married the daughter, Rebbe Shena, the daughter of the Mitteler Rebbe, and then Chaim Musya, and then he became Rebbe after his uncle passed away. So he was a son-in-law and a nephew. So he says like this: the Maimer Tzemach Tzedek, the Tzemach Tzedek talks, Oidis histalkus admur hemtzoi, about the passing of his father-in-law, the Mitteler Rebbe. Before he passed away, the Mitteler Rebbe started to say tremendous ideas, revealing tremendous secrets of Torah. Pasuk, until he reached to the verse, that within you, meaning within Hashem, is the source of life. He's saying that's a verse. And as he said the word Chaim, his holy mouth didn't even complete the word life, Chaim in Hebrew, and he passed away. Histalkus, and the Tzemach Tzedek, his son-in-law, and his nephew said that a passing like this, on such a high madrega, such a high level, no one had passed away on such an elevated level since the time of Rashbi bar Yochai, which we celebrate his passing on Lag BaOmer, the author of the Zohar, the student of Rabbi Akiva. Talking about a gap of, 1800 years. Vashaychus, and in the continuation of the talk, the Rebbe speaks of how this is connected to this week's parsha, which we talk about the gal. The gal is the heap of stones that Lavan and Yaakov made to separate. Shreim is the word gal means a heap, but if you turn the letters around, it's Lamed Gimel, which is the number value of 33, which is a hint to the idea of the 33rd of the Omer, which is Lag BaOmer, the Yom HaElula, the passing of the Rashbi, of the Rashbi bar Yochai. Because when you have a separation between with a heap of stones versus a wall, a heap is not really such a separation as a separation if you were to build a proper wall. And there's ways to pass through a heap, unlike a wall, which if there's no door, then there's no entry. And as Lavan and Yaakov agreed that this heap represents that you won't pass me over to me and I won't pass over to you to do bad, but for good reasons you could pass over. Lira, only for bad reasons. Iyata over, you can't pass over. Avalata over, but you can pass over if you have good intentions. And in the talk, the Rebbe explains that this idea that sometimes there was this fear of teaching the Kabbalistic teachings of Torah to reveal them because they could be misused and misunderstood. So this idea that there has to be a separation between the hidden parts of Torah. By definition, the word hidden means yisod. Pnimis Torah, it's hidden. It's something that not everyone can know. And the revealed parts of Torah is also like a heap, which is not like a wall, which should never be passed over. It just has to be passed over in the proper manner. If you want, we could break the heap only for good reasons. So if there's a way to teach Chassidus, and that was the whole mission of the Baal Shem Tov and of the Alter Rebbe and the Mitteler Rebbe, you have to understand that the Alter Rebbe was the author of Tanya, and he was the teacher of Chassidus. But the levels of teachings that the Mitteler Rebbe taught were expanded on a totally different level. And not only that, most of the publications of his father were publicized by his son, the Mitteler Rebbe, meaning a lot of the teachings were given over by the father. But the son put him into print, which is another level of revelation. And if something goes into print, it stays forever. And this is the idea of Rashbi bar Yochai. That his idea was to break the boundaries of the hidden parts of Torah and the revealed parts of Torah. And he revealed through the Zohar. And also you have to remember that what's the comparison between Rashbi and the Mitteler Rebbe? The whole Zohar that we have, which is a whole book of the fascinating Zohar, was all said on the day of his passing. Like the Mitteler Rebbe revealed deep teachings on the day as he was passing, literally while he was saying Chassidus, he passed away. So too, we know that the Talmud tells us of all the teachings the Rashbi did on the day of his passing. There's a lot of footnotes, obviously, about this. As we know, like I said, of the great teachings of the Rashbi that he gave over to his students on the day of his passing. Holy words that have never been revealed up to this point. So too, the Admar Amtzai, with regard to the Mitteler Rebbe, that he took the teachings of Chassidus of Chabad of his father, which were like the idea of Chachma, which is like a wisdom, which is a flash of idea, hasn't been broadened yet in understanding, which is by his father, the Rabbeinu HaZakeh, and the Alter Rebbe, and he brought it lihispashtus, he magnified it, bisrachbus, in both length and width of Bina, which is the attribute of Bina, of his understanding, and a continuation how the Rebbe explains the greatness of the Mitteler Rebbe and the great avod of the Mitteler Rebbe, his teachings and his method of teachings. It was published, HaGal was edited, Aidei Kvoi Kedushas Ad Shlita by the Rebbe, and for those who wanted to learn it, its details are in the Likutei Sicha, the published talks of the Rebbe, our Rebbe, in volume 5, page 129 on. All right, let's continue. We're going to learn more about the Mitteler Rebbe. The Rebbe says to give more details. What is the difference between the method of teaching of the Mitteler Rebbe, the son of the Alter Rebbe, and the Alter Rebbe, which is the difference between the attributes, the intellectual attributes of Chachma and Bina? We know that the first manifestation of the 10 spheros, 10 attributes, is Chachma. Chachma is wisdom, and knowledge is understanding. We have Chachma, Bina, Das, wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. So Chachma is wisdom, and then the Bina is understanding. I say so the way things work is when a person has an idea or an insight. First you have the flash of the idea. It's deep. It's original, but it hasn't been broadened yet. You can't articulate it because you don't know it fully. So first you have Chachma comes first, and then comes Bina. First you need the depth, the flash, what's called the Nikuda in the letters of God. It's the letter Yud. Just like the letter Yud is a dot, has no expansion. So to Chachma is the raw idea that hasn't been understood, hasn't been broadened, and you haven't seen how it could apply. But in some way, but it's much deeper because you don't understand it. It still has in its rawness, and the rule of thumb is, as it explains, if you don't take from Chachma to Bina, that's why they're called like two friends that can't separate. Because if you don't expand on it, so you'll forget it because it's raw. So you have to kind of bring it to Bina understanding and to really try to understand. And sometimes the idea is where people get lost is where they lose the inspiration and they expand. So then all of a sudden you forget what inspired the expansion, and kind of you could go off. That's where you lose the truth. Where you start going, that just triggers a thought, but then you move away from the trigger. The chachma is, no pun intended, is that you keep the dot in the room. It's called nekuda be'echala, where the inspiration stays there. You don't lose focus on the inspiration, but from the inspiration you expand understanding. But if you lose the inspiration in the process of trying to understand it, a lot of the times you're going to go off to the wrong direction. So he says this. So the first thing is first you have to have the inspiration of the wisdom. Then comes the understanding. The idea of Bina is to take the inspiration, to expand it in width and length. And in the letters of God, that's the letter of Hey. So the Yud is a dot, the Hey is a square, right? But the point is that Bina doesn't add anything, it just expands what is. So too, when we look at the teachings of the Alter Rebbe, and literally, if you were to learn Chassidus, especially this week it's very, very much revealed. If you open up the teachings of the Alter Rebbe, like those who joined our class Sunday night of Torah Or, of the Alter Rebbe, his father's teaching on V'shafti b'shalom beis avi, The idea of the Avod of Yaakov, of what he did with the dream and what he did with the stones, and he turned into a single stone, elevating the letters, oil, bringing it down, the Avoda, returning home, that Vayihaya, Vayalila, Likim, the whole thing that we learned in Torah on Sunday night. So if you were to open up the teachings of his son, the Mitteler Rebbe, he takes that same idea and expands it to such a way, not that it's just, he articulates the idea more. You realize he never really understood what his father was saying. I mean, you understood it on such a level of what you would say yud, such a dot, such a nakuda, such a point that when it expands, you realize you just literally didn't understand what his father was saying. Only when you learn the teachings of his son, you really get a depth and appreciation, and even a greater understanding of what the mission is. So he says like this: so too when it comes to the teachings of the Mitteler Rebbe, as he himself writes in the beginning of his publication, the Kalman Misfara, for many of his teachings. Everything he says is from his father. He's saying it more expanded. You have to remember that Mitteler Rebbe, when he said Torah sometimes for 8-9 hours at a time. It was fascinating to see that even the Gentiles would come to see. The Mitteler Rebbe would stand literally on a Shabbos and talk for 8-9 hours at a time, and he could do sometimes twice. I mean, and they say that there wasn't a sound. No one made a sound. It was like, not even the natural human sounds that people make, sitting 8 hours in a room. Nothing. It was like as if everyone just totally captured that affect not just their soul but their body by the teachings of the Mitteler Rebbe. So he says, as he writes, that whenever I teach is for my father, the Alter Rebbe, I say them more elaborate, and I give more explanation, which is the way it is. And so everyone can understand the details. Like I said, all of a sudden you open up a Maimer of Mitteler Rebbe, it's not like the words are just expanded. It's like you realize it's like you're looking at something totally folded up. And it's unfolded and you see something totally different. Is something that's in the attribute of Bina, understanding, that's not in the wisdom. Meaning to say, just like there's a difference between a river and a spring. It's not, you can't say exactly, it's just an expansion. But so too, the teachings of Bina give something addition. He's going to explain. Just like there's an addition to understanding that Bina has something that Chachma doesn't have. But like I said, it's not just, although it can't be new ideas, but you see it totally, its effect is different. It's more permanent. If you don't understand something, it's hard for it to have an effect. When you understand something, it takes you totally. Like I said, the students of the Mitteler Rebbe is someone to Chassidus. Like I said, we spoke yesterday. His son-in-law said, if you were to cut the finger of my father-in-law, blood wouldn't come out, Chassidus would come out. That was his whole mitzias. And his whole life was Chassidus. He sat there, if all he wanted to do was hear his father's Chassidus. He's getting married, it was because he's going to hear Chassidus. His sister he had a very special sister, she's buried next to her father, that she would have special talks delivered to her, that no one was allowed to be in the room. He would hide under the bed, because he wanted to hear his father's teachings. His whole life was Chassidus. So he says like this, so just like it is in the attributes, there's a difference between Chacham and Bina. So too, there's a difference between the different types of tzaddikim, righteous people. That tzaddikim, a tzaddik is like the creator. We find things in the life and the leadership of the Mitteler Rebbe, the son of the Alter Rebbe, that we didn't find by the father, by the Alter Rebbe. The Rebbe says to explain. The word lechura means seemingly. Seemingly usually is in a statement to say seemingly it's like this, but it's not. But the Rebbe says that even the word seemingly is the seemingly remains. Meaning to say, sometimes the word seemingly is not as seemingly it's like this, but it's not. But seemingly is like, you may not think it's like this, but it is, meaning the chiddush, that's something unique. So what's the Rebbe saying? There's something to say about Bina, the expansion of wisdom, of understanding over wisdom, which is the avod of the Alter Rebbe, the Mitteler Rebbe, which is the Gabi Chachma, the way his father was wisdom, which was the Adam Razak and the Alter Rebbe. So this is what we find, that even the Alter Rebbe said, the Alter Rebbe said about his son, there was that the certain things that my son has that I don't have. You have to remember that the Mitteler Rebbe was huge in the life of his father. We spoke again yesterday, the Rebbe Baruch HaMezbush, the grandson of Baal Shem Tov, writes to the Alter Rebbe about something that they had in disagreement. What's going to be with the Mitteler Rebbe? That's how great. When the Mitteler Rebbe made a chasna, he said Chassidus before Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Baditchev that no one wanted to go through the Alter Rebbe wanted the Mitteler Rebbe to go first, and they all walked through the wall together because he was mamish, this huge giant of a person. It's like his son-in-law said, no one lived like that since 1800 years before, since the times of the Rashbi. B'kivin Rabbeinu Hazakin emes v'terase emes. If the Alter Rebbe says that there's things that my son has that I don't have, and he's not just flattering his son. And something that's not true. The Alter Rebbe would never say something that's not true, even if it's even if he's saying it in a way of flattering his son. Everything the Alter Rebbe said was true. I remove it. It's understood. You may think that's just a praise, but if he said it, it's true. That there's ideas that the Mitteler Rebbe has that his father doesn't have. And if the Alter Rebbe said it, that's the way it is. What does this mean? You have to remember something. The Alter Rebbe, although he was a student of his teacher, the Maggid, you have to understand, the month of Kislev is the month, this month that we're in, the Hebrew month of Kislev, is the month of Chassidus. Next week we're celebrating the 19th of Kislev, which is a week and a half from now, which is the liberation of the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya. This is the month where we celebrate the Rosh Hashanah of Chassidus. It's like we're like getting ready for the New Year's of Chassidus. So it's not just that we're learning things that are ideas. This is the time to talk about them. And the Rebbe says like this, that you have to remember, the Alter Rebbe was a student of the Maggid, who was the student of the founder of Chassidus, Aklalis, of the Baal Shem Tov. But the Baal Shem Tov's teaching Chassidus was one way. His student, the Maggid, taught it in another kind of way, really kind of setting up the organization of Chassidus, where the students of the Maggid all became dynasties. All the dynasties you see today of the different Chassidic groups are some way or another from the group of the students of the Maggid, because the Maggid was the organizer. He organized Chassidus into the institutions and to the branches of the different groups. Each student had his method. The Alter Rebbe had a totally different method than the other students. So much so that there was a disagreement of the method of the Alter Rebbe. He went in to teach and expand the understanding of Chassidus. It was the idea of Chabad. The word Chabad is Chachma Bina Das, wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. It's to bring godliness down in a way that yes affects my heart, yes it affects my emotions, as we've learned in the teachings of the Alter Rebbe. But it's all about understanding knowing God, bring it through your mind. That your mind is kind of the center point to ignite the heart and guide the heart and the actions and thoughts, speech and actions, as is explained in the Tanya and other things in other places of Chassidus. So there's a strong emphasis on the understanding of the teachings of Chassidus. It's kind of more closer to the Kabbalistic teachings of understanding the upper realms and the spheros through knowing God is how you could love God. Now, but the Alter Rebbe, the way he started to teach, he had to teach it. He couldn't just expand right away. You can't just walk in and say 8 hours of Chassidus. So you're going to lose your crowd right away. So the Alter Rebbe himself had stages in his career as a Rebbe that he started off with just vertlach, small ideas, and he had to build slowly to be able to even get to discourses. But even his discourses were much smaller than his son's because he was building up. When you start a system and you're starting something new, you have to bring the people with you. So he says like this, when the Alter Rebbe started to teach, the teachings of Chassidus Chabad, it needed to be. It had to be in points. Ideas that were brought down in Nekudis, like inspirations, or Chachma, like they're very deep. And that's why when we learn a Maimer of Torah, it's sometimes much harder, although they're much shorter, because they're so almost cryptic, they're so deep. So you can't right away start talking for 8 hours. The Rebbe says it can't be, and it's not good to be that way. We see with the Alter Rebbe himself. Shilfnei Peterburg, before the story of Yutes Kislev. In Alter Rebbe's life, it's known as before Yutes Kislev and after Yutes Kislev. And how did they refer to it? It wasn't Leningrad then, it was called Petersburg. Right? Leningrad is when Lenin took over. So Petersburg, so it was before Petersburg and after Petersburg. That's the way they describe the teachings of the Alter Rebbe and the method of the teachings of the Alter Rebbe. Shilfnei Peterburg, like I said, in the beginning, the Alter Rebbe said very short ideas. And not only that, because Chabad demands Chacham Bina Das and demands Pnimius, the difference with the Alter Rebbe was he would never use a miracle. He wasn't about inspiring you. It wasn't about overwhelming you. He was about internally changing you. The Alter Rebbe had choices. They said, the famous story when the Alter Rebbe was traveling and he wanted to bless the new moon, he blessed the Gentile driver to stop the boat, even though he showed him he could stop the boat miraculously, because we have to bring everything down, bipnimius, internalize it. He didn't want to overwhelm it with miracles. And one of his colleagues said, "Why you could have just taken care of the Tsar with the name of God." He says, "But that's not the point. Everything has to be done within the world." So the Alter Rebbe, when he said initially his Torahs, they were shorter, but then Sarfas Island, they burnt the world with overwhelmingness. Even though that's great, right? Imagine you stand in a situation where the Alter Rebbe is saying Chassidus, and you don't even understand it, but your soul goes, lights up on fire. You're like, phew, you light up. So there's a milah to that. There's something great about that. There's something that's not good about that. Why? Because you haven't internalized it. You've just been in an experience. You don't understand what's going on. Petersburg, but after Petersburg, after he went out of the prison, he said, I'm not going to say any more Chassidus that's going to burn the soul. I'm going to say Chassidus that you're going to understand. You're going to sit there, you're going to listen, and you're going to understand. Yes, it may not have the effect spiritually that I had before, but it's going to be really you. It's going to become part of you. Because he elevated through the imprisonment. He was able now to bring Chassidus not in a way that overwhelms someone, but a person could internalize the teachings of Chassidus. His chila amirs Chassidus barichis yaser, and therefore we find in Likutei Torah, which are mainly the talks of the Rebbe after he came out of prison, we find something there that's much more elaborate, and kind of there's that less of that fire. Even when you learn it today, you feel the difference. As the previous Rebbe explains, the Rebbe says, but nevertheless, even though the Alter Rebbe did that, but still his whole method was much more shorthand than his son, because again, he was just starting this new idea. Adoch Chassidus was before him, the Mitteler, the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid, but nothing on the level of the Alter Rebbe. It was a whole other idea of bringing Chassidus down to the mind versus the heart. We know the difference between Chabad and Chagas. Chabad is about the mind, and other Chassidic dynasties are about the heart. Chagas means the emotions. And then I'm building on his father. Comes the Mitteler Rebbe, the son of the Alter Rebbe. Dov Ber, his Chalem Chassidus Barichos. Then the crowd was ready for the elaborate talks of the son to say Chassidus in Mamish, like I said, 8-9 hours. Ba'ifin shel Havana v'Asaga, explaining and understood and comprehension. Ba'ifin shel Chassidus shebedairei, the students of the Mitteler Rebbe, the his Chassidim of his generation, they were able to understand the teachings. It wasn't overwhelming them. And the Rebbe says the difference also in the Alter Rebbe and the Mitteler Rebbe wasn't just the way they taught, but who the students were. The students of the Alter Rebbe were giants. So he could talk cryptic. He could say nekudas, he could say points. By them, right away, they understood it. But the next generation, the Chassidus expanded to people that were beyond just the great scholars. Even they were able to understand Chassidus. So too afterwards, the generations after the Mitteler Rebbe, till the Rebbe says the Chassidim of our generation, as we're sitting tonight, 5,786, a person could open up publications, podcasts, YouTubes, the Chassidus is being explained in elaborate ways in all languages to the most detail from the most simple person. The person seemingly on a beginning level could understand some ideas of Chassidus. That was something that wasn't possible years ago. Shagam hem yechalav nezayis, to understand that, and that started really with the expansion on another level of the Mitteler Rebbe, and this is the point of Mashiach. This was what the Baal Shem Tov told the Mashiach told the Baal Shem Tov. Ad la'afatzis amyanas chutza. The point is Chassidus can't be kept inside. You have to take the well springs. and bring it outside. Shafilu b'chutza, even outside, meaning outside the place of the comfort of this of the yeshiva, of the shul, of the place with the Talmidei Chachamim, where the great scholars are learning. Yoichel HaKabbalah can understand Chassidus. The idea is not just that the waters flow there, but the spring itself goes there. Atzmai. Shemitarik b'kolshu, we know that one of the unique qualities of a spring versus other bodies of water when it comes to purification, the mikvah, that just a drop, you don't need the 40 sa, you don't need the measurement that you need in a mikvah. Mikvah has to be a certain size of a bath, of a pool of water, but that doesn't apply to a mayin. A mayin is a spring. A spring, the waters are so powerful that b'kolshu, even any kind of water purifies the thing that needs purification. Afilu tipa achas, even a drop. Imrak kol gufay oilabem. If you could go in, means obviously it depends what's being immersed. You can't immerse the finger, but if you're immersing something small, then the water doesn't have to be a certain size. The idea is that as long as the person could get into a small amount of water, that's enough. I mean, technically, if you could dip in a drop of water, that'd be fine. The problem is you can't dip in a drop of water. But a mikvah, the pool itself is not a qualified pool of purification unless it has 40 sa, which is a measurement of water. And this is what the Mitteler Rebbe blessed and wished upon himself. In Yiddish means he wished. What did he want to accomplish? Where did he want? What was his thermometer of success of what he was trying to do with the teachings of Chassidus? That he wanted when two people would meet, what would they talk about? When you say hello, when you finish Shalom Aleichem, what's the first conversation? Not how did the Seahawks do, or how's the football, or how's the turkey tonight? He wanted when people to meet, that the first conversation is to understand the oneness of God. Not just any oneness of God, but Yichud Eilah, which we know is the Shema Yisrael, the upper level of oneness of God, the idea of absolute bittul. That when they discuss their open conversation, how they greet each other, what's a conversation that we didn't see each other in a while, what are we going to talk about? How do you understand the Maimer? How do you understand the Chassidus? That's how the Mitteler Rebbe, he wanted so much Chassidus by his students, that should be their opening conversation when two people meet, because that's what their life is about. It's, when something really matters to you, that's the first thing you want to talk about. So the first conversation two Chassidim should have when they meet each other is a Shudei Elah. What's the unification of God? Not just that they should speak about it, the words of Chassidus. By them. That should be that where they're at. Like I said, that should be so pressing to them that when you see someone you haven't seen in a while, what do you want to talk about? Is the unification of God, and that was to him a measurement of success of what he accomplished in his students. The idea is that Chassidus should be so permeated within the Chassidus should be so permeated within his Chassidim, within his students, in the way that they understand it so deeply. Because the better you understand it, the more it becomes one with you, and that's what Chabad is all about. The Chabad is to becoming one with godliness. And that becomes their whole being. That when they meet someone, what do they talk about? Is Yichud Eilah? What's Shema Yisrael? Because this was the whole life of the Mitteler Rebbe himself. Like the Tzemach Tzedek says, if you were to cut the hand of the Mitteler Rebbe, it wouldn't be blood that would come out of his hand, but Chassidus. His whole life, because the blood is the life of a person. The Mitteler Rebbe's life was so much Chassidus that if you were to cut his finger, and what would show, what's the circulation of his being, is Chassidus. That's why it goes back to the idea of the Gal, the connection between the Mitteler Rebbe and the Lag BaOmer and the Rashbi. That this mechitza, this separation, where people were scared to have the inner teachings of Chassidus, to be the inner teachings of Torah, to be connected with the revealed part of our avoda and a real part of our study of Torah. The Alter Mitteler Rebbe is one of those who broke the boundary. And through the Mitteler Rebbe, again, when the Rebbe speak about the Mitteler Rebbe, you see we don't find any talks like this about almost anyone else. The Mitteler Rebbe was like what he did, what he accomplished. That this was the way to paving through to coming of Mashiach. Bias Mashiach said, "Came with the coming of Mashiach." It's our job to break this boundary. that when two people meet, you shouldn't be talking about weather. Shouldn't be talking about I don't know what. But they should meet each other and say, how's godliness in your life? Means maybe they can't talk about Yichudei Ilah. Maybe they can't talk about the unification of Hashem. But godliness is so permeating in their life that what matters is how's the godliness in your life going? The Bit HaMechitza bringing over the wellspring of Chassidus. Because we know that the Mashiach told the Baal Shem Tov, and this job was taken by the Alter Rebbe specifically, that the well springs have to go out in order for Mashiach to come. By bringing the well springs out, is going to bring this usher in the times of the Mashiach. Yahweh is going to come. V'yigalenu is going to redeem us. V'karv mamish speedily in our time. We'll just say a little bit further. He talks about the Mitteler Rebbe. Tes Kislev, 9th of Kislev again, which falls out this year again on Shabbos. Hugam Erev Yud Kislev is also the beginning of Yud Kislev, like we said before, the liberation of the Mitteler Rebbe. Yem HaGeulah Sha'adam Amsay, B'frat B'amdeinu L'achri Chatzos Hayom. The Rebbe says now we're ready after, means the Rebbe's Farbrengen in 1968, going into 69, after midday. Sheshach Kfar L'yem Shalachrev, Shekein Hu B'chol Yom, Umud G'chayis B'yem Shabbos, Shalachri Chatzos Hayom, Bizman Shalrayim N'rayim Maschin Likr B'Torah. So we see that in Shabbos itself, from after midday, we start to connect to the next week, because we read in the Parsha, in the Torah, in Mincha, about the next week's portion. And we make a bracha when we read the Torah. As Parsha Shachas L'Marcha, already the Parsha that starts Sunday. We know that as Chabad, Chassidim, and it's taught us by the Mitteler Rebbe, that we start learning Sunday morning from his father, the Alter Rebbe, that Daf Leben mit der Zeit, Sunday morning, right away we open up the Chumash and start reading the next Parsha. The Parsha that we're going to read the coming Shabbos, the following Shabbos. And when do we start reading about it? Already Shabbos Mincha. So the Rebbe says something about the redemption of the Mitteler Rebbe. We know that when the Mitteler Rebbe was liberated on the 10th of Kislev, there was a lot of similarities to his liberation, as it was the liberation of his father, the Alter Rebbe, on the 19th of Kislev, that we're going to also talk about in the following week. As is known, the saying, whatever the Alter Rebbe experienced in his life, somewhere or another similar to that, mirroring that, the Mitteler Rebbe, his son, experienced in his life. Aderech Maim Razal, it's brought down about Yaakov and Yosef. Whatever Yaakov experienced in his life, in a different way, but based on the same ideas, his son Yosef experienced in his life. That the Torah says this. That's the way things are in the world. And therefore, if the Torah establishes that there's certain sons and fathers that experience similar situations, so it repeats itself. And that repeated itself also in the life of the Alter Rebbe and the Mitteler Rebbe. What's the example of the similarities? When it comes to redemption of his father, the Alter Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe writes himself that when was he notified that the redemption is starting? When I was reading chapter 58, and in chapter 58 I was reading the chapter of 19, which is the Yutes, means verse 19, that my soul is redeemed. Poida means like a redeemed, which the Alter Rebbe now was imprisoned. Yitzasi b'shalom, he left peacefully. Means when did he leave imprisonment? While he was saying the verse that King David was talking about redemption. So too is exactly by his son. As he was saying the verse of chapter 55, verse 19, he also went out to freedom. Movements from this understood. Sitkas Eretz Yisrael, Eretz Chaim, Hamamodes Shalach Leelu, Shiyashu Eretz Kodesh, Alter Rebbe, Hisha Amdalana, Liftes Chayin Nafshenu. The Alter Rebbe writes that what was one of the merits that he had to be able to be worthy of redemption was the monies that he sent to Eretz Yisrael. The Alter Rebbe was in charge of the fund, the Kol Chabad, that would send money to Eretz Yisrael to feed, especially those days there was no industry, there was no commerce. Eretz Yisrael, the people who lived in Eretz Yisrael lived 100% almost. dependent on the monies that came in from Chutzlars, from Russia and Europe, and maybe in America later, that was supporting the people who lived in Eretz Yisrael. There were people that would send their monies to Eretz Yisrael to support. They wanted to be involved in the people that lived in Eretz Yisrael because they had no business. They're being supported from people that sent money from Chutzlars. And the Alter Rebbe says, what was his merit? He had many merits. He taught Chassidus. He brought people back to Judaism. He changed the world. But he said, what stood by him? What schus? What merit did he have to get out of the imprisonment of the Tsar, who accused him of revolutionary? Was that fact that he supported monies to Eretz Yisrael. So too the Mitteler Rebbe. Shagam hu is asik b'tzitkas Eretz Yisrael, b'tzlakas Yisrael al mamadis v'hisha amdaloi, and so too the Rebbe says, and then the Rebbe didn't continue. We know that the Mitteler Rebbe bought property in Hebron. Till today, there's the Mitteler Rebbe shul next to the Avram Avinu shul in Hebron. Mitteler Rebbe is the first Chabad Rebbe to buy land in Eretz Yisrael. He bought land in Hebron, and he also said, what schus, what merit did he have? That he should be able to get out of this situation was the monies he sent to Eretz Yisrael. The Mitteler Rebbe's daughter, Menucha Rachel, was sent by her brother-in-law to Eretz Yisrael. The Mitteler Rebbe's daughter actually lived in Hebron. The Slonim family, they lived in Hebron. They were big people in Hebron. She's buried in Hebron today. They say that even the Arabs would come ask blessings from the Mitteler Rebbe's daughter, from Menucha Rachel. They say it never rained on her. Whenever she walked, the drops would go to the right, to the left. She never was hit by rain in Eretz Yisrael. That's a great woman, the Menucha Rachel, which we could spend hours talking just about her. Time to go, and so it's nice to bring a bit about the Mitteler Rebbe, getting ready. The Rebbe says it's a huge thing to learn about the Mitteler Rebbe on and around his yard site. So may he be a melization, good advocate for all of us, for everything that we need, materially, spiritually, in our individual lives and collectively for Klal Yisrael, for the world. Good Shabbos, everyone. Thank you for joining.
Thank you, Rabbi.